Okay, let's unpack this. We are starting this deep dive not with a slow introduction, but with a piece of high-stakes geopolitical drama ripped straight from the hypothetical headlines of January 2026.
That's really the only way to set the scene here, because the policy decisions we are tracking, they're incredibly dramatic. So picture this moment our sources describe. The U.S. has just concluded a very sensitive raid in Venezuela.
The capture of Nicolas Maduro.
Exactly. So you'd expect the whole conversation in Washington to be about Latin America, stabilization efforts, that kind of thing.
But that's not what happened. The immediate pivot by President Trump, it defied all expectations. I mean, on January 5th, he shifted the administration's entire focus northward.
Right to Greenland.
Stating, and this is a direct quote, "We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security." And this wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark. It was immediately followed by his senior aides talking about, well, the extraordinary measure of potentially seizing the autonomous Danish territory.
And that aggressive rhetoric, which, it echoes the purchasing attempts we saw from the same administration just a year earlier in 2025. It really underscores the core thesis of our deep dive today for you, the listener.
Which is?
For Washington, the pursuit of resource security has now definitively become synonymous with national security.
Yeah.
It's no longer just a secondary economic concern, it's primary.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to figure out why Greenland, this autonomous Danish territory that's just geographically massive, 3 times the size of Texas, yet mostly covered in ice, is suddenly the most critical, contested piece of real estate on the global chessboard.
Right. We need to unpack its immense and, largely untapped resource wealth.
And understand its increasingly strategic position in the rapidly melting Arctic. And I think critically examine the really complex local, political, and international barriers that have, so far, prevented any major mining activity from really getting off the ground.
We've drawn from a really comprehensive analysis here. It focuses specifically on Greenland's world-class rare earth potential, and it details the acute U.S. supply chain vulnerabilities that are driving all of this, and, of course, the escalating geostrategic competition with China in the region.
Insights are remarkable. The sheer size of these deposits is one thing, but the scale of the logistical and political challenges, they are truly monumental.
They are. And our conversation is going to pivot around 2 specific world-class deposits right on the southern tip of the island.
Kvanefjeld and Tanbreez.
Kvanefjeld and Tanbreez, yes. And the seemingly insurmountable hurdles they face. The future of Western rare earth access, it really hinges on infrastructure funding, reducing political risk, and maybe most surprisingly, the fate of a massive political ban that was triggered entirely by the co-location of uranium within one of the deposits.
And we'll also define the roles of the key U.S. strategic finance arms. We're talking about the Export-Import Bank, IXIM, and the Development Finance Corporation, or DFC.
Which are the key instruments the U.S. plans to use to try and win the strategic race.
Let's start with the resources themselves. When you look at Greenland's geological portfolio, it's like a mineralogical wish list. We're talking iron ore, graphite, tungsten, palladium, vanadium, zinc, gold, copper, even offshore oil potential.
It's all there.
It's all there. But based on the policy statements coming out of Washington and just the geopolitical heat around the island, it is abundantly clear that rare earth elements, REEs, are the primary existential driver of this urgent interest. So why, right now, are REEs so crucial that they're dictating U.S. foreign policy?
Well, it really just comes down to a fundamental and an acute vulnerability. The U.S. economy, and specifically its defense industrial base, it just cannot function without these elements.
They're not interchangeable.
Not at all. They're essential components for everything from the magnets used in advanced defense systems. So think high-precision missile guidance, radar, stealth technology, to core commercial needs.
Like electric vehicles.
Exactly. Permanent magnets used in EV motors, wind turbines. If you're building 5G networks, you need them. If you're building F-35, you absolutely need them. The core problem, is that the U.S. supply chain is almost entirely dependent on a single source.
And that dependency is what turned from, a theoretical risk into an immediate, painful crisis in 2025. I think we need to detail that specific catalyst because it really explains the current panic.
Absolutely. The year 2025 was just marked by this high-stakes diplomacy and economic fallout, and it all followed China's aggressive implementation of export controls.
But they didn't target all rare earths equally, did they?
No, and that's the key. They were very specific. They focused on heavy rare earths, or HREs. These, like dysprosium and terbium, are much harder to find outside of China, and they're crucial for any application that requires high temperatures and high magnetic performance.
So what was the fallout? I mean, how bad did it get when those controls hit?
It was economically disruptive on a massive scale for Western nations. This wasn't minor. It wasn't confined to some niche industry. It exposed these deep, deep vulnerabilities in crucial supply chains.
So automotive manufacturing.
Automotive, medical imaging, aerospace components. We saw widespread shortages, production pauses, manufacturing delays. It proved the risk wasn't theoretical anymore. It was capable of inflicting immediate, deep, and systemic economic damage across the entire Western alliance.
That was a wake-up call.
That was the aha moment for policymakers, absolutely.
So, okay, once that problem was clearly identified, this acute vulnerability to Chinese export controls, what has the Trump administration been doing as a global counter-strategy? Aside from, making loud statements about buying islands, they must have a long-term plan.
The long-term plan is one of active diversification and financial underwriting. The administration's pursued a dual approach. First, public-private partnerships. A key example is that equity deal they struck with the U.S. rare earth company MP Materials.
The one in California.
That's the one. They're working to revitalize domestic processing capabilities. So that's the onshore solution.
And the second approach that focuses on friends and allies.
Exactly. The second avenue is forging new bilateral agreements with reliable, mineral-rich partners around the world. We're seeing deals being hammered out with Saudi Arabia, which is looking to diversify its economy.
Japan, of course.
Japan, which has always been hyper-aware of this stuff. And Australia, a key existing producer. The overarching strategy is clear: deepen commercial ties, provide financial incentives. This is expected to be a fundamental cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy throughout 2026.
So it's a pivot away from relying just on military or diplomatic influence.
Right. It's about using economic relationships as the primary tool.
Okay, this brings us back to Greenland. We know it has REEs, but if the U.S. is already signing deals with Australia and Saudi Arabia, how does Greenland stack up? We really need to quantify the island's importance in this whole global landscape.
Quantifying it is essential to understanding the urgency. Globally, Greenland ranks 8th in the world for rare earth reserves. We're talking about an estimated 1.5 million tons of material.
And that number is probably conservative.
It's often considered conservative, yes, given the scale of unexplored territory. So while China dominates global production and processing right now, Greenland offers this proven, massive reserve base that could, it holds the potential to fundamentally disrupt the entire geopolitical resource equation.
And you said it's a big if it can be successfully developed.
A very big if.
And it looks like the U.S. is finally moving beyond just rhetoric to put serious money behind this. Our source material has a very concrete example of this investment interest involving the Export-Import Bank.
We do, and we should probably clarify for the listener. The U.S. Export-Import Bank, or IXIM, that's the U.S. government's official credit agency.
Yeah.
It's designed to support U.S. exports and counter unfair competition.
So it's a strategic financial tool.
It is. And in June of 2025, IXIM sent a letter of interest to a company called Critical Metals Corp. For a substantial $120 million loan.
And what's that loan for specifically?
It's dedicated specifically to funding their Tanbreez mine project in Greenland. This is highly significant because if that loan is ultimately approved and disbursed, it would mark the Trump administration's first overseas investment in a strategic mining project.
The first one.
The first one. That fact alone just highlights the political and strategic urgency attached to securing access to this particular resource. It is a clear signal. The U.S. is using its financial institutions as geopolitical instruments.
But the U.S. isn't operating in a vacuum here. This rush for investment is happening directly in the shadow of what China has already established in the Arctic, the Polar Silk Road. Their efforts to gain influence, even if they've stalled, they're persistent.
China's strategy is one of relentless long-term patience. Their policy was formally laid out back in 2018 with the launch of their Arctic policy.
Which they provocatively dubbed the Polar Silk Road.
They did. And a key part of that was their controversial and frankly opportunistic self-designation as a near-Arctic state, despite, their geographical distance.
Right.
Over the past 7 years, their strategy has been multi-pronged. They try to grow their footprint through large-scale scientific research, proposals for infrastructure investments, and, crucially, natural resource acquisitions. They're building a platform for future access.
But you mentioned that, by most metrics, the Polar Silk Road has largely failed to achieve its goals in Greenland. Where exactly did China's strategy hit a wall?
They hit a hard security wall. Major infrastructure projects that would give China operational access, so bids for airport expansions, involvement in naval stations, satellite ground stations, they've been consistently blocked.
And these blocks were encouraged by the U.S. and Denmark.
Strongly encouraged, yes.
Yeah.
They view these activities as attempts to establish a dual-use military and civilian foothold in a very strategic location.
So if they're being blocked from owning the infrastructure and the land, what keeps China a viable potential mining partner in Greenland? Where is their undeniable leverage?
Their leverage is singular, and it is potent. Their dominant global lead in rare earth separating and processing expertise. This isn't just a minor advantage, it's industrial control.
So they don't have to own the mine.
They don't have to own the mine. They own the industrial capacity, the specialized chemical engineering, the infrastructure required to efficiently turn raw ore into usable components like purified metal oxides. That's what modern manufacturing needs.
It's a powerful position. They own the middle step of the supply chain.
Precisely. And this reality gives them enduring commercial relevance. In fact, Greenland's Minister of Business has publicly warned that without a substantial, sustained influx of Western investment and processing partnerships, Greenland will inevitably be forced to turn to other partners.
Including China.
Including China, simply because the Western world currently lacks the necessary processing capability at scale.
And they already have an existing commercial foothold in one of the two major deposits we mentioned, Kvanefjeld.
That's right. The Chinese rare earth company, Sheng Resources, is already the second largest shareholder in the Kvanefjeld project. They signed a crucial memorandum of understanding back in 2018.
And what was that MOU for?
It was specifically designed to handle the critical midstream steps. The processing and marketing of materials extracted from the Kvanefjeld site, should it ever get permitted. This commercial reality ensures that despite intense geopolitical opposition from the U.S., China's financial and processing foot remains firmly in the door of Greenland's most valuable deposit.
Let's move our discussion from the resources beneath the ice to the location of the ice itself. Greenland's strategic importance is certainly not new, but it's unquestionably escalating. The island has long served as a critical anchor for U.S. security interests.
That history is deep. It extends all the way back to countering U-boat threats in World War II. Bases were established then, and they later evolved during the Cold War to provide a forward defense against the Soviet Union.
And today, the most vital operational asset is the Pituffik Space Base,
which many listeners might still recognize by its former name, Thule Air Base.
Yes. And what exactly does Pituffik do today? Why is it still so foundational to North American defense?
Well, Pituffik is the northernmost U.S. military installation. It sits only about 750 miles south of the North Pole. Its capabilities are absolutely critical for strategic defense.
It houses the early warning radar systems.
Exactly. The vast, complex systems that provide missile detection and defense specifically, detecting intercontinental ballistic missiles traveling over the North Pole toward North America. It also performs crucial space surveillance, tracking satellites and space debris.
So it's a foundational, non-negotiable element of North American security.
It is, and its existence is a constant, tangible reminder of Greenland's strategic value to the U.S., entirely independent of the mineral wealth that's under the ground.
But it's the condition of the ice that is fundamentally changing the equation and creating new opportunities. Melting ice caps driven by global warming are rapidly reshaping Arctic geopolitics.
This is perhaps the single largest long-term geopolitical shift in the region. The environment in Greenland is still brutal. Only about 20% of the landmass is currently ice-free. However, as global temperatures rise, the ice is melting.
Which is opening access to previously inaccessible mineral resources.
And crucially, to entirely new global shipping and transportation corridors.
Which brings us to the famous Northwest Passage. For the listener who might only know this as a route historical explorers failed to navigate, what's its actual modern significance?
The Northwest Passage is a series of maritime routes weaving through the complex Canadian Arctic archipelago. Historically, it was essentially locked down by thick, year-round sea ice.
So commercially non-viable.
Completely. Except for maybe brief, expensive, and very risky passages. But scientific projections now suggest that with accelerated global warming and advancing icebreaker technology, the passage may soon be reliably open for commercial transit every summer.
And the economic implications of that opening are truly staggering.
They're massive, and they instantly change global trade geography. This passage connects major trade centers in East Asia directly to Western Europe and the U.S. East Coast. And this new route is an incredible 7,000 kilometers shorter than the current road through the Panama Canal.
7,000 kilometers. That's a huge saving in time and fuel.
Significant savings in time, fuel costs, insurance costs. It's a game changer.
So the nation that can control or influence this emerging global passage gains a profound economic and security advantage.
Precisely. And Greenland's advantageous position sitting essentially at the Atlantic gateway to the Northwest Passage makes control or influence over its territory and its surrounding waters absolutely key to unlocking that advantage on a global scale. This is the new Arctic real estate battle.
And this strategic advantage is precisely why the U.S. moved so aggressively to prevent China from gaining access to the Tanbreez deposit, even intervening in a private commercial sale. The sources call this the battle for Tanbreez.
Battle is fitting. It wasn't some subtle diplomatic request. It was a high-level geopolitical intervention in a mineral transaction. As we established, China's dominance in REE processing gives them a powerful advantage.
They can just offer processing offtake agreements.
Exactly. They don't need to buy the mine. They just need guaranteed access to the raw material. And the U.S. feared this leverage would allow China to control Greenland's resources without any messy, permanent infrastructure presence.
So, detail for us, how did U.S. officials intervene in this specific commercial transaction for Tanbreez?
They lobbied extensively. U.S. officials actively and aggressively contacted the Tanbreez developer to discourage and ultimately prevent the sale of the deposit to a Chinese buyer. The stakes were so high that ultimately the deposit was sold to the New York-based Critical Metals Corp.
The same company getting the potential Exim loan.
The very same. And it was for a price reportedly less than earlier Chinese offers.
Wait, less money. So the original seller took a financial hit.
That's what the source material suggests. And that's a key takeaway. It illustrates the absolute primacy of geopolitical security interests over pure market economics in this region.
The U.S. was willing to encourage a less lucrative deal just to keep it out of Chinese hands.
Just to ensure the resource went to a Western partner and not into the Chinese supply chain? That's how serious this competition is.
This high-level engagement reflects a history of U.S. diplomatic efforts in Greenland, which, as you mentioned earlier, hasn't always been consistent.
That's an important point. If we look back to 2019, the U.S. did sign a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, with Greenland. The agreement was a sign of cooperation aimed at jointly surveying the region and exchanging scientific knowledge.
Specifically for critical mineral.
Yes, specifically for critical mineral development.
But the relationship stalled, especially after the change in administrations.
It did. Efforts to renew or solidify that MOU under the subsequent Biden administration, they came up short. That initial agreement is now nearing expiration, which is precisely why the current administration is pivoting to a strategy of direct financial influence.
The exam loan and DFC focus.
Exactly. When formal diplomacy wanes or becomes inconsistent, financing and direct, strategic investment become the primary actionable tools for maintaining influence and securing access. Greenland needs money, and the U.S. strategy is to be the provider of first resort.
We've established that Greenland has immense reserves and incredible strategic value, but the barriers to development are equally immense. So let's now focus on the heart of the geological wealth. The two massive deposits on the southern tip of the island near the town of Narsak. We're calling them the twins of Narsak, Kvanefjeld and Tanbreez.
And they tell wildly different stories about the viability of Arctic mining.
They really do. They highlight the complex trade-offs involved.
Let's start with Kvanefjeld. Geologically, it is a powerhouse. It's the third largest known land deposit of rare earth elements globally. It holds an estimated 11 million metric tons of reserves and resources.
And critically for any miner, it has high ore grades.
Very high rare earth ore grades, specifically 1.43%.
Which sounds like a dream on paper, massive size, high grade. Now contrast that with the statistics for Tanbreez.
Tanbreez is geographically staggering. It is potentially the world's largest deposit overall, estimated at a massive 28.2 million metric tons.
And it has a lot of the valuable, heavy rare earths.
An incredibly high percentage, over 27% of its total rare earth composition. However, its estimated rare earth ore grade is significantly lower than Kvanefjeld, sitting at 0.38%.
So we have the third largest known deposit with a high grade, and the potentially largest deposit with a lower grade but higher value, heavy rare earths. This leads us right to the critical role of the ore grade percentage in mining economics. For the listener, why is that number so central to whether a project moves forward or just fails?
Well, the ore grade is the defining factor in determining the economic feasibility and environmental impact of any mine. It's simple arithmetic, really.
More valuable stuff per ton of rock.
Exactly. A higher grade deposit means you have to dig up, transport, crush, and process significantly less raw material to extract the same amount of valuable REs. Less material processing translates directly into dramatically lower operational costs, lower energy use, which is vital in a place with limited power, and crucially, less radioactive or hazardous waste produced per ton of finished product.
So how competitive is Kvanefjeld's 1.43% grade on a global scale? Does it stand a chance against the world's leaders?
It is highly competitive, especially when you compare it against many proposed North American and other emerging projects.
The ones the U.S. cites as diversification options.
Right. For instance, Kvanefjeld's 1.43% is vastly superior to Brazil's Serra Verde project, which is around 0.15%, or the U.S. project Round Top in Texas, which sits at a tiny 0.033%. So compared to those Western alternatives, Kvanefjeld is economically very sound.
But there are still the global champions.
Yes, and it does fall short of the global leaders, and those efficiency gaps matter. For context, Australia's Entweld, often considered the gold standard, has an enviable grade of 6.4%.
Wow.
And China's primary source, Bayan Obo, is at 2.555%, and the U.S.'s operational Mountain Pass is at 5.96%. So Kvanefjeld is an excellent, viable deposit, but is certainly not world-leading in terms of efficiency. It needs substantial investment to be cost-competitive globally.
Okay, so Kvanefjeld is economically viable. It has Chinese processing backing. It has the sheer scale. Why, then, has this world-class project been completely stalled and locked in litigation since 2019? This is where the uranium barrier becomes the ultimate showstopper.
This is the critical complication. Geologically, rare earth deposits are often co-located with radioactive elements, most commonly uranium. Mining these deposits inevitably produces large quantities of radioactive waste,
Which creates monumental, long-term environmental and public health challenges that, well, that few local communities are willing to accept.
and Kvanefjeld is the extreme example of this problem. It's not just co-located with uranium. The deposit contains an estimated 270,000 tons of it.
270,000 tons, that number is staggering. What does that make Kvanefjeld globally?
It means that Kvanefjeld is simultaneously the third largest rare earth deposit and the eighth largest uranium deposit in the world. The concentration of uranium is approximately 300 parts per million, or ppm.
And that concentration level is exactly where the grassroots political action came in and drew an absolute red line.
An absolute red line for development, yes.
So let's detail that political action, because it's a prime example of local democracy effectively overriding massive international resource interests. The source material calls the 2021 general election the mining election.
It was a pivotal moment for Greenland's sovereignty and its political identity. The future of the Kvanefjeld project, specifically the question of radioactive material, was the central issue dominating the entire campaign.
And the Inuit Ataqatigiit Party won on an anti-mining platform.
They won heavily on their anti-uranium platform, yes.
Oh.
And they moved swiftly to deliver on their promise.
What was the specific legislation they passed?
Greenland's parliament promptly passed legislation banning all exploration and mining of mineral deposits that contained a uranium concentration over 100 ppm.
And Kvanefjeld sits at 300 ppm.
So this law effectively blocked the entire world-class project from ever moving forward under the current legal framework. It was a legislative death sentence for Kvanefjeld.
And this wasn't just a political stunt. It was the direct result of a powerful, organized grassroots movement demanding environmental protection.
Absolutely. The environmental and public health concerns were organized and translated into overwhelming political power by the grassroots movement known as uranium. No.
Right.
They campaigned intensely. They emphasized the need to protect the sensitive Arctic environment, public health, and Greenland's crucial tourism and fishing industries, which are the mainstays of the local economy near Narsak.
And one of its founders was even elected to parliament.
The success of the movement was physically personified. One of its leading founders, the activist Marianne Pavisen, was elected to the Greenlandic Parliament in that 2021 election. So they didn't just win a policy debate, they seized political power.
So we have this world-class, multi-billion-dollar deposit permanently stalled and tied up in a massive international legal fight. What is the financial cost of this political decision to the investor, Energy Transition Minerals?
Well, the financial cost is almost unimaginable in the context of Greenland's economy. This is a cautionary tale for investors globally. Energy Transition Minerals, the developer, argues that the legislation constitutes illegal expropriation.
That the government seized their asset by changing the rules.
Exactly. After they had invested millions. So since 2022, they've been engaged in litigation and are demanding compensation of $11.5 billion.
11.5 billion. I need to take a pause on that figure. Let's compare that to Greenland's total economic output.
To give you context for the scale of this, Greenland's entire gross domestic product, their GDP as of 2023, was only $3.3 billion.
So the compensation is?
The demanded compensation of $11.5 billion is equivalent to nearly 4 times the total annual economic output of the entire country. This is a staggering sum of money and a significant legal threat that hangs over any future policy and regulatory stability in Greenland.
It sends a chilling, immediate signal to any major Western investor about the risks of political instability.
Absolutely. It makes the prospect of getting a loan from EGSM or DFC much, much riskier.
In stark contrast to Kvanefjeld, the Tanbreez project, which the U.S. is now backing, has successfully received an exploitation license. What was the key geological difference that allowed Tanbreez to clear that political barrier?
Tanbreez was the beneficiary of different geology. It's co-located primarily with other useful industrial minerals, tantalum, niobium, and zirconium, rather than uranium. And crucially, its uranium concentration is well below the 100 ppm threshold.
So it avoided the political red line.
It did, and that geological distinction allowed it to move forward to the exploitation phase, a success that the U.S. is now actively leveraging through that proposed $120 million Exim loan and direct geopolitical support.
So even if a mine successfully navigates the political landscape and secures a license, like Tanbreez, it still faces the logistical reality of the Arctic. Greenland, despite its immense size, is defined by an almost total lack of enabling infrastructure. It is a logistical vacuum that has to be filled.
It is arguably the most significant practical hurdle. The infrastructure deficit has historically been the primary choke point strangling any attempt at mining development. Since World War II, there have only been 9 recorded active mine sites on the entire island.
Only 9.
And today, only 2 small projects are operating. Critically, no large-scale rare earth mining has ever taken place yet. The logistics are simply too prohibitive.
Let's start with the staggering numbers for the transport infrastructure. I looked at the source material, and I have to admit, I was astonished by the road network statistics.
The numbers defy belief for a modern sovereign territory trying to host globally significant mining. The entire island of Greenland has only 93 miles of road.
93 miles.
That's the total, island-wide. And most of that is contained within and immediately surrounding the major towns.
Wait, 93 miles? On an island 3 times the size of Texas? That sounds less like an infrastructure deficit and more like a logistical nightmare. How on earth do you move heavy machinery or millions of tons of ore in that environment?
Well, the answer is you primarily rely on very expensive, seasonal, and difficult-to-maintain means. Coastal shipping, helicopters, or extremely limited ice roads built only in the deep winter.
Which just wipes out the economic viability.
Instantly. The vast distances required to move machinery, materials, and processed ore across that island mean the deficit kills most projects before the first ton of earth is even moved. You need roads, and roads require immense capital and are extremely difficult to build across permafrost and fjord terrain.
And once you've somehow moved the ore to the coast, you need port capacity to export millions of tons of material. What is the port reality?
The port reality is equally challenging. Greenland has only 16 ports in total, and their deep-water capacity is severely limited. While Nuuk, the capital, is the largest port, handling about 2 million tons of cargo in 2021.
The port closest to the mines, Narsak, is tiny.
It's tiny. That small port handles a mere 50,000 tons of cargo annually.
50,000 tons. That's a rounding error for a world-class rare earth operation.
Exactly. It's a fraction, just 2.5% of Nuuk's capacity. You absolutely cannot build a globally competitive multi-million ton per year mining operation based on that tiny shipping volume. Developing world-class deepwater ports, it's a $500 million plus undertaking in the Arctic.
And no single mining company wants to shoulder that cost alone.
No. And finally, beyond transport, mining requires massive, reliable power, which is highly challenging in the Arctic.
Right.
The energy reality is inconsistent and extremely limited. Most electricity comes from localized diesel generators or small hydro plants. The largest installed capacity is only 54 megawatts, and it's located in Nuuk.
Which is 290 miles away from the Narsak region where the mines are.
Exactly. This means that any major mining operation would require significant localized investment in new energy generation and transmission, whether that's new hydro, wind, or even a small nuclear solution, a very costly and complex undertaking in that severe environment.
This overwhelming infrastructure vacuum is precisely where geopolitical influence plays out. And we saw a clear, expensive example of Western powers actively stifling much-needed infrastructure funding due to security concerns. The blocked Chinese airport investment.
This is a textbook case study in the cost of containment. In 2018, China's state-owned communication construction company was shortlisted to construct and expand a network of key airports.
A massive infrastructure package.
Massive, worth $550 million.
And what did that mean economically for Greenland?
It was transformative. That $550 million investment was equivalent to 17% of Greenland's 2023 GDP. It would have fundamentally modernized their transport sector and generated thousands of jobs.
But the U.S. and Denmark viewed it as a direct threat, a non-military way for China to establish a dual-use foothold.
Correct. The U.S. intervened forcefully. Secretary of Defense James Mattis urged the Danish government to interfere and pull the bid.
And Denmark complied.
They did. Denmark ultimately pulled the bid and financed a large portion of the updates themselves. And while this successfully blocked Chinese involvement for national security reasons, the repercussions are profound.
The cost of security is the slowing of economic growth.
Exactly. And this interference feeds growing political discontent among the Greenlandic people. They are pushing hard for true economic independence from Denmark, and they need investment to get it. The risk is that if Western funding remains insufficient, those political and economic demands will eventually override security considerations,
Forcing them to open the door to China regardless of Western objections.
It's a real possibility.
Given this enormous capital requirement and the clear strategic security interest, the analysis proposes a comprehensive transatlantic blueprint. This leads to recommendation 1, the need for coordinated action with European allies.
The sheer scale of capital required to build out Greenland's essential ecosystem, roads, power, ports, is simply too vast and too risky for one nation or one company to handle alone. It demands a coordinated approach involving the U.S., the EU, and other like-minded allies.
And the source material suggests we already have a successful model for this coordination, demonstrated through a non-REE mineral graphite. Tell us about the Amitsoq project.
The Amitsoq Graphite Project, also in southern Greenland, offers the perfect blueprint. In June 2025, the European Union recognized its importance by officially designating it a strategic project under its Critical Raw Materials Act.
Which speeds up permitting and guarantees political support.
It does. And 6 months later, the London-listed Greenrock Mining Pact secured its 30-year exploitation license.
And this graphite is crucial for the very same strategic supply chains that are driving the RE push.
Precisely. This project targets high crystallinity flake graphite, a mineral absolutely essential for lithium-ion battery anodes, the backbone of the EV revolution, and for various high-performance defense applications.
So it's a clear template for US-EU cooperation.
It is, because both entities desperately need alternative, reliable supplies. The context here is critical. China controls roughly 79% of global graphite production and has already shown its willingness to weaponize trade controls through export restrictions. Coordination on financing and regulatory support is the only way to underwrite projects at this scale.
Moving to recommendation 2, how should the U.S. development finance institutions, specifically DFC and XMM, structure their investment to strategically tackle this infrastructure gap, rather than just funding one mine at a time?
The recommendation is to shift from single project financing to ecosystem financing. DFC, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, and XMM should focus their investment on Greenlandic infrastructure corridors.
An infrastructure corridor, what does that actually entail in the Arctic?
The goal is to identify 1 to 3 priority mining areas and concentrate all shared infrastructure there. So instead of having 2 different companies build 2 separate ports 50 miles apart, they build 1 shared port.
And 1 shared power station, 1 shared road.
1 shared road and centralized fuel logistics. This avoids duplicative infrastructure, drastically lowers the capital cost for first movers, and de-risks the entire investment by sharing logistics among multiple eventual projects. It turns a logistical nightmare into a scalable industrial hub.
And this corridor approach is a smart use of DFC's recent policy changes, isn't it?
It is, and it leverages existing authority. DFC expanded its operational scope to operate in high-income countries like Greenland, with some guardrails, of course.
Right.
And critically, the European Energy and Security Act of 2019 already specifically authorized the DFC to support energy-related investments in Greenland. The problem is that this authority, despite being on the books, has yet to be fully invoked for any major strategic mining projects. Making progress in Greenland hinges on finally aligning this available authorized capital with the urgent policy priorities.
Infrastructure funding is clearly necessary to move millions of tons of ore, but the $11.5 billion Kvanefjeld litigation proves that it's not sufficient. Political risk is perhaps the single biggest deterrent to private capital. This leads us to recommendation 3, taming the moving goalposts.
You can throw money at ports and roads all day long, but if the regulatory environment is unstable, private companies will walk away. Investor confidence has been profoundly chilled in Greenland.
And not by strict rules, but by uncertainty.
Exactly. Investors can price in rigorous safety standards. What they can't price in is deep uncertainty over how and when those rules might change, especially concerning politically sensitive issues like uranium.
So if the goal is to stabilize the regulatory environment without compromising Greenland's standards, what specific steps must the government take to reduce this policy risk and restore investor confidence?
They need regulatory certainty. This means clearly defining and consistently enforcing regulatory red lines. They must codify non-negotiable requirements that are politically durable.
So specific radiological thresholds.
Specific radiological thresholds. Perhaps revisiting the 100 ppm, but making the new number legally binding mandatory standards for tailings management, clear financial expectations for mine closure bonding, and specific workforce parameters, like mandatory local hiring ratios. This sets a clear, predictable signal that investors can rely on.
And for capital that has already been deployed, like the millions spent at Kvanefjeld before the ban, how can Greenland protect those early investments from abrupt policy shifts that arise from future mining elections?
Well, the government should introduce clear grandfathering or transition provisions. Grandfathering ensures the capital already deployed, millions spent on exploration, feasibility studies, is protected from being immediately stranded by abrupt policy shifts.
So if a company secured a license under an old rule, a new rule wouldn't immediately revoke it.
Precisely. These provisions are essential for signaling long-term stability, making Greenland a more investable jurisdiction while still maintaining high standards for all future projects.
This necessary regulatory stability must be paired with genuine local support. That social license to operate is critical. Let's contrast the Kvanefjeld social license failure with the successful licensing of Tanbreez, which provides the model for recommendation 4.
The difference between the two projects is a masterclass in community relations. Robust, early, and sustained community engagement is the essential ingredient for insulating projects from the dramatic political shifts we've seen.
Kvanefjeld failed by underestimating the opposition.
They did, and that opposition translated directly into a legislative ban. Tanbreez, on the other hand, benefited from a proactive approach and a clear articulation of local economic benefits.
Give us the specifics of the Tanbreez engagement model. What did they do right?
They went above and beyond mere procedural compliance. Back in 2013, the project completed a detailed local use study that was truly robust. It included extensive, personalized interviews with over 65 local residents.
Not just politicians.
No, actual fishermen, hunters, sheep farmers, and tourism workers to understand the real impact of their operations. This was complemented by multiple public hearings designed to maximize transparency and stakeholder participation.
And what was the key deliverable that built that durable social license?
It was a specific, measurable commitment to employment. The project made a clear, binding promise, sourcing 90% of its workforce locally during both the construction phase and the production phase.
90%.
That tangible, high-percentage commitment to local jobs helped build a durable social license to operate. A license that Kvanefjeld never secured because the perceived risks just outweighed the promised abstract economic gains.
So the strategy needs to go beyond basic procedural social impact assessments and deliver tangible, visible benefits that the community can see, measure, and hold the company accountable for.
Exactly. Greenland should move toward requiring formalized community benefit agreements, or CBAs. These agreements commit operators to specific measurable outcomes that are written into the license.
So guaranteed local hiring targets, apprenticeship programs,
Mandatory procurement targets for small and medium-sized local enterprises, and regular public reporting on delivery of these metrics. This shifts the relationship from one of extraction to one of partnership.
and financially, the local economy needs to see the benefit directly, long before the first metric ton of rare earth concentrate is sold internationally.
That visibility is key to winning long-term trust. The government needs to establish a simple, credible royalty or impact revenue framework with a defined percentage share specifically earmarked for local municipalities, not just the central government in Nuke.
Which reinforces the link between mining and community-level gains.
It makes the benefits visible and felt by local people well before the project even enters production. This preemptive investment in trust is essential for neutralizing future political opposition.
The final strategic takeaway, then, seems to be a delicate balance. The U.S. opportunity is not about unilateral force or political rhetoric or attempts to purchase the island, but about coordinated, respectful investment designed to build a durable partnership.
Precisely. The U.S. and its allies must use their financial instruments, EXIM, DFC, EU funds, to help Greenland responsibly develop its resources while respecting its political autonomy. This strategy successfully reinforces shared geopolitical and supply chain objectives while also respecting Greenland's goal of achieving greater economic independence from Denmark. It's a win-win, but only if the West can act fast enough and with enough capital to outweigh China's existing processing leverage.
To summarize this deep dive, Greenland is a strategic priority driven by the geopolitical need for supply chain security and its world-class rare earth potential. 1.5 million tons of reserves spread across the two massive twins of Narsak deposits.
But the barriers are historic, political, and financial. You have the chilling prospect of an $11.5 billion compensation claim hanging over the Kvanefjeld project.
The infrastructural reality of only 93 miles of road on the entire island, and the existential threat of that 100 ppm uranium ban that effectively killed the highest-grade deposit.
The only viable path forward for the West is a coherent transatlantic strategy, hinging on shared infrastructure funding via DFC and XM corridors, and, most critically, winning the trust of the local people through clear, stable regulation and binding, tangible economic benefits like local jobs and municipal revenue sharing.
It's fascinating. The Tanbreez mine holds massive potential for U.S. heavy rare earth access. But securing that access seems to be a competition that boils down to two factors.
It's a race. A race between established Chinese processing expertise on one hand and the Western willingness to fund transformative infrastructure and respect local regulatory red lines on the other. This raises a really important question for me. Given the intensity and success of that 2021 mining election, which prioritized environmental sovereignty, can any external power successfully underwrite a major Arctic mining project if the economic benefits, the jobs, the revenue share, the local training, aren't immediately and tangibly delivered to the indigenous communities that currently hold the decisive political power?
It's a fundamental trade-off that Greenland's leadership faces. We ask you, the listener, to consider the long-term decision facing them. How much sovereignty and what level of environmental risk are they willing to accept, and crucially, from whom will they accept it, in exchange for the vast infrastructure funding necessary to finally achieve true economic independence?